I'll say every day I'm more and more grateful for the giant print Bible that I got. Just one of those things, right? The second scripture reading this morning comes to us from the 32nd chapter of Genesis as well. We are continuing the story of Jacob's return in this larger worship series with relationships, on relationships. Starting with the 22nd verse. The same night, he, Jacob, got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across a stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." May God's blessing rest upon the experiences of Scripture on this day. May it guide the meditations of our hearts and the words of my lips. We started off this worship series with the second creation story and this idea of the importance of relationship. The main thread that I want to pull on from that first week is the importance of a relationship with God. And then the second week we had the story of Abraham and Sarah, especially Sarah, and her laughter at the joke that came her way in old age, I guess we'll put it that way. And we were reminded, and I want to pull on this thread, reminded of the challenges sometimes of relating to each other. Sometimes it is difficult, but today I want to focus on the challenges of relating to ourselves. We might not often think about what it is to relate to ourselves, but I will venture that the easiest person for us to lie to is ourselves. I tell myself all kinds of fibs on a regular basis, and I've come to believe many of them until someone comes along and sets me straight again. We tell ourselves things to justify the actions and the inactions that we get involved in. We tell ourselves things to make ourselves feel better or make ourselves feel worse. And so the idea of being as healthy and whole as possible as individuals is something that is important for us to understand. And this Jacob story is a good window for us to peer through. Now, the text talks about Jacob wrestling with God in this, but I'm coming from a place, another way of understanding it, that said that Jacob didn't actually wrestle with God per se, but with his past. Because see, when Jacob was born, he was already grasping at the things that belonged to other people. That's how he got his name. He was hanging on to his brother's heel when he came out. Jacob is no stranger to wrestling. He's been doing it his whole life. And rarely, if ever, in Scripture is Jacob actually alone. I'm aware of at least 2 times in the text where that's pretty much it. The first is when he has the dream of the angels ascending and descending on the ladder, and then there is this moment here. The first is when he was going out, fleeing from his brother after conspiring to to take advantage of his brother's weaknesses and his father's failing health to steal the blessing, the wealth of the family. And the second time he's alone is here on this return. He's alone with himself, with his past, with his anxiety, and he is alone with God. And he has to deal with all of this. We heard in the first reading how anxious he was. For God had said, it's time to go back to the land of your ancestry. And he's like, yeah, but my brother lives there. And I have not always done what is good and right in relationship with my brother. And now I am afraid. Fear is a powerful motivator, isn't it? That's one of the reasons why we often tell ourselves the stories we say, because we're afraid. We don't want to see clearly what's being reflected back at us, which is something that Scripture actually does quite well, is reflect our humanity back at us. And so Jacob, who had wrestled before, but who had also often chosen to flee from situations, finds himself in a wrestling match as he was alone. In some ways, I'm reminded of the movie Fight Club, if you've ever seen it. Jacob has to come to terms with the decisions that he has made. Now, this isn't an all-at-once sort of thing. I believe this is a lifetime sort of thing. But in this moment, as Jacob prepares to cross the river again to return to the land of his family, the land that God is calling him to, there's a lot of baggage that Jacob has to come to terms with. He has to wrestle it down. It's not a happy process, but in the end, it is a blessing. It is not an easy process. We are told that Jacob wrestles the entire night long with this. Some of us spend our whole lifetimes wrestling down ourselves. One bit here and one bit there as we are attempting to come to terms with who we are and who we are in God. Who we are in relation to others. Who we are inside. And so he wrestles the whole night long. And the morning is coming. A new day. The night in Scripture is often a time when nefarious things happen. It is also a time of preparing for transformation. It is the time of the caterpillar in the cocoon, going through that rather amazing, life-altering, and pretty traumatic process of metamorphosis. And now the new day comes. The dawn is breaking. And all of that wrestling must come to a stop. The individual that Jacob is wrestling with, be it angel, be it divine God, be it Jacob's past, whatever it is, says, I've got to go. At some point, that past, that story we have told about ourselves has to go. The power it has over us has to be laid aside. It doesn't disappear. Jacob forever carries the mark of that wrestling match. But the power of what was, the stories he told about himself that were maybe not an accurate reflection, those things have to be set aside in this new day. So he wants to know. He wants to know what's going on. And the one he is wrestling with offers this transformation moment. You will no longer be Jacob, the one who grasps at things that are not necessarily his to have. You are now Israel. A new name for a renewed being. We have traditions like this in the life of the church. We rename people or we christen them at certain times. Baptism, even though we in the disciples' tradition don't often change names when we are baptized, we take on the name of Christ as we go into the water and come out again. Jacob is baptized. He is immersed in his own unique way, and he comes out a different human being. He's had to wrestle himself down, and he comes out blessed, and he comes out limping. Sometimes coming to terms with our past does not leave us physically whole. But if we were to continue the story, if we were to continue on from this moment in the narrative, we find that he will cross the stream, and that relationship that he was so afraid of will be a relationship of healing, not one of destruction, as he is actually embraced by the brother that he had taken advantage of. And we find that Jacob will indeed be, as promised, a parent of a nation, of a great multitude. And even though we might not count ourselves as direct blood kin, we know that God builds family. We are part of that. And so we are invited on this day to either continue or to renew that hard work, bit by bit, of being transformed, of wrestling ourselves down, not of abandoning our history, but of no longer allowing that story we have told about ourselves to have power over us. For we are called to be present as a people of God, and it is a new day. Thanks be to God, and amen.